Well, good afternoon. Good to see everybody, and thanks for sticking around. I think this last presentation is going to be very important. People often ask us at Indiana Landmarks, what are some of the big challenges that you face? And one of them that we've been talking about all day today, and that is the lack of demand for the numerous houses that we have in our cities and towns that are just not occupied or are in poor repair, which leads us to believe that we need every incentive that we can find to rehabilitate these properties, because the house may be worth this much when you finish it, and you put this much into it. That's the simple mathematics of what we deal with every day, and that's why we need incentives and we need organization. And I think that our speaker is going to address two of those things. I'm really pleased to introduce Jacob Sipe, or Jake Sipe, who is the Executive Director of the Indiana Housing and Community Development Corporation. She's held the Executive Director position since 2013, and was appointed by then Governor-elect Mike Pence. But he's been with IHCDA since 1999, which is 24 years and 8 months, so been a good run. Previously, he headed, before becoming Executive Director, he headed IHCDA's real estate department, was responsible for administering Indiana's low-income housing tax credits and other housing finance programs. In 2011, Jake received the Michael Carroll Community Economic Development Leadership Award for his work in advancing affordable housing. And that award is a big deal, so a great honor for Jake, well deserved. He's a graduate of the Indiana University School of Public Environmental Affairs, and he's been a great friend to Indiana Landmarks and Preservation, as well as advancing our state's efforts in affordable housing. How we came to be connected with Richmond more recently, we had lunch last year, and we were talking about various things, and I've been, of course, talking to Matt for years about challenges here in Richmond, and so what, do you have a community development corporation? There's not even the receptacle here for so many of the programs that the state offers. And Jake said that they've not done a lot of work here yet. They have lots of resources available for the Richmond community. So in a very short order, entirely responsive, Jake and his staff came out to meet with stakeholders here in Richmond to talk about what it means to have a community development corporation and take that to the next step with the Community Housing Development Organization, or CHODO. So we're making some progress in this, and I have to say, I've rarely seen a state agency so responsive and so friendly in such an immediate way to address the community. So please welcome Jake Sipe.
All right, well, nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be here and speak and say a few words. I wasn't given much of an agenda. I was given pretty much a lot of freedom to say whatever I wanted to talk about today and do my presentation. So I tried to weave in a lot of different things here with my presentation. So I'm going to just jump right in, and we'll just kind of go from there. Just real quick, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of what the Indiana Housing Community Development Authority is. Our mission is to provide housing opportunities, promote self-sufficiency, and also strengthen our communities. And so we try to do that under these are very simple. I try to keep things simple. in housing, and when we talk about our agency, it can become pretty complex pretty easily. But making three primary items that I think we can all relate to in a mission statement is something that we work really hard to achieve every day at our agency. I want to mention that the agency is also quasi. We're financially self-sufficient. We don't receive any funds from the state of Indiana. We have a board of directors, and Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch chairs our board. Where we have a lot of different programs, everything from homelessness to home ownership, and anything in between there, within that spectrum of housing, IHCDA touches. We may not have every funding source for every type of program or for every community, but within that area, we certainly can provide technical assistance and support communities in working in the housing industry. So, a few years ago, Governor Holcomb asked us to create a central location for all the housing data. Not all of it, but some of the primary housing data in our state, because it's all over there, it's all over the place. And so we went and we created the Indiana Housing Dashboard. We had some of our key stakeholders from around the state come and help us identify what are those key indicators that our communities and our developers and our builders, they need to make informed housing decisions. And so that include our realtors, our mortgage bankers, the builders, our developers, some of our community leaders like from AIM, Accelerate Indiana Municipalities. And so we developed this dashboard, and it's at indianahousingdashboard.com, and you can go on there. And there's really, it's broken up into really 5 areas. You look at population, housing supply, rental affordability, jobs, and homeownership. And if you look in those, there's 5 categories there, and within the housing dashboard, you can drill down deeper into that. And I'm gonna get into some of the features. I ran a report for Richmond, I have it right here. I want to touch on some of the things that, for me, at just a high level, quick glance within, I did this Tuesday. I went in and I just looked at your dashboard and looked at it real quick. I was like, what is it? What are some things that were interesting to me? I wasn't able to form an opinion or anything, but it just was some information that I had that I thought was interesting. So I'll go into some of that too as well. As I mentioned, you can go into the dashboard, and this is actually the cover page here, and I clicked on Richmond. You can go to the state of Indiana, you can go to any county, you can look at any community, any city or town, and you can pull this dashboard right now, will tell you some of those things that we talked about: home ownership, population trends, jobs. In that little orange area right there, you can see, you can click on that, and that's where it'll create, in about 30 seconds, it'll create an 80-page housing needs assessment for free. Now, a lot of communities spend thousands of dollars to create a housing needs assessment. And you don't have to do that in Indiana. This is we're one of the states where having access to do a housing needs assessment in a matter of a few seconds is at your fingertips. That doesn't mean that that solves all the challenges that all of you have, and that is not a full comprehensive housing needs assessment. There's some other things that have to happen in order for you to actually have a quality, informed housing needs assessments that takes action. Speaking of taking action, and I'll touch on this in just a second, one of the features within the dashboard is you can look at and compare your community versus other communities or the state. And so you can go up to 6 communities. I did 3 real quick. I did Richmond, Wayne County, and the state of Indiana. And I looked at the population. I just ran this. I just took it and just ran it, and I put it and I snapped it and put it in here. But then when I looked at it, I was like, well, that is interesting. The population piece is really kind of fascinating, where you see the state's population continue to grow over the last few years, and then you see that decline here in Wayne and Richmond. I will say this, on each one of these, the source of data point, the data point source is identified in the actual graph, and so you can see that. Usually it's like American Community Surveys, there's a lot of other different data points. Some of the data isn't quite up to speed, up to date, like I think this is 2022. So we just rely, this information is directly tied to the data source, and when the data source does update, this will automatically update as well. So, but I did find that interesting as you look at the population. I'm going to get into a little bit more about this in a second too as well. But when you drill deeper into it, which you can within the dashboard, and actually this is on page, I think this is like page 17 here. I'm going to leave this with you, or you can pull it yourself or put it in PDF, or you can actually also put it into an Excel spreadsheet as well. But as you can see, you can actually drill down into the census tract data, and you can vary at the micro level. You can see where that population decreases, and then also where that population increases, because there is population increase here in Richmond. And you can see it pretty clearly when you drill into the map. So, and that's the population change from 2021 to 2022. This is another area that I found interesting as I was looking at it. Again, I spent less than 20 minutes looking at your housing needs assessment. So I'm not, I wasn't getting into the details. I wasn't trying to ask a lot of questions. I was just looking at it real quick, just briefly, like, what's interesting? I found this part interesting. Your commuting patterns within the community. Of your jobs, I think there's like 47,000 jobs here. 10,000 live and work in Richmond. You have a substantial number of folks who commute into Richmond. I often get asked the question, what is workforce housing? It's my favorite question. What is workforce housing? Again, I like to try to keep things simple. It's where your jobs go to sleep at night. So your workforce housing is not in Richmond. I'm sorry, it's not. A lot of your workforce housing is actually outside of Richmond. And it tells you on the next one where they are. This is your workforce housing. You have about 1,500 from Spring Grove, about 400 from Connorsville. You have some folks from Centerville. You have almost 800 people coming in from Indianapolis. So there's just the idea of just showing you kind of where that commute looks like. This is another piece that I thought was really interesting. Again, I just spent just a few minutes looking at this. Looking at your renter and your owner-occupied housing that you have. But, and you know, there's a lot to unpack here. You know, you're at 56% owner-occupied homes, 43% are renters. Okay, I think I don't know if that really stands out or not. But the part that stood out to me was you have 14.5% of your homes are vacant. That's unusual. I haven't seen that. And I think you really have to drill deeper into that to understand what's going on. And it does kind of start to share with some of that is some of these homes are vacant, they're abandoned, some of these homes are in foreclosure. So I think there's a lot more that needs to have a deeper dive into understanding this 14.5% vacant rate that you have. So. And this starts to get into some of that, where it starts to share with you what is that made up of. And so as we look at that, there's that there's that status of your vacant homes that you have. So again, there's a lot of reasons for it. And I don't know if there's a good answer to how you address it. I do have one answer, and I'll share it with you in just a second. But take action. This is the answer. The dashboard gives you the data. It gives people like me who, I don't live here, but I can identify some things within the report real quick within 20 minutes of saying, like, here's some things that kind of stood out to me. All of you folks, you're the ones that really have the answers to all this. And it has to be done in a collaborative way. Any housing needs assessment, the data isn't the answer. The data just allows you to make informed decisions. And the informed decisions have to be done as a community. And you have to take that action together. And that means that you have to engage. And you have to have some conversations. What you're doing here today, this is like that. This is exactly what has to happen. But it has to happen across the entire community and in each neighborhood. Because we also looked at that, as you broke it down by census tract, you can tell that the census tracts were also different, very different, in many different ways. So that conversation is going to change between census tracts. It's not going to be the same conversation. There's going to be homeowners, there's going to be renters. There's going to be service providers, there's going to be folks that are looking to build. There's going to be those on the finance side. You're going to have elected officials. So all of those conversations have a different perspective. And so I think it's really, really important here that you have to take action. What the dashboard does is it helps you, walk you through how can you take action. And so that community engagement piece, planning, is really, really important. It's probably the most important piece of all of this in terms of if you're going to plan, you have to have a conversation, which is what you're doing here today. We also have to set priorities. You know, one of the things that I want to show you in just a second with my presentation is housing connects to so many different parts within our community. And what I mean by that is that housing isn't going to solve all of our issues, but it is going to influence almost everything within a quality of place. It's going to influence your infrastructure, your water, your sewer, your roads, your sidewalks, your broadband. It's going to influence your healthcare. It's going to influence your education. It's going to influence your jobs, your economy. It influences all those things. And so what's important is that you have to be able to connect dots. You have to be able to connect the housing to other challenges that are in the community. And that's how you can start to identify the priorities. And whether that be home ownership, whether that be rental, whether that looking into the the challenge of the demographics, looking at the disparity between whites and blacks in terms of home ownership rates, all those things are there. But you have to be able to make informed decisions, and you have to start to set priorities. But don't set priorities of just saying we want to address 14.5% vacancy. Don't do that, because that's not going to solve the challenges within the community. The challenge is, how do you connect that 14.5% vacancy rate with education, with home ownership, with your infrastructure? All those things have to be connected together. Role of government. Yeah, role of government, there is a role for government. It's not going to solve the problem. It has to have this community conversation like you're having here today. I wish I could come into the community and say, IHCDA has this financing source, and it's going to reduce your vacancy rate from 14.5 to 3%. I wish I could do that, but I can't. You know? And then in the dashboard also, we have some resources. We start to try to identify some opportunities where you can look at some examples of policy, of financial, of best practices in terms of other organizations, whether it be in the private sector or the public sector, that has resources for housing. So I'm going to get into the tools. These are some of the tools that IHCDA has to specifically for affordable housing. And affordable housing is merely just, there's some kind of income restriction, and there's going to be some kind of market price restriction, whether that be on the rent or the home ownership side in terms of the acquisition cost. So there are some things like that. That's my best definition of affordable housing. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different perspectives on what that means. But we have home ownership programs, and we have multifamily programs for developing rental housing. For home ownership, we basically have one tool for development, for building, and that's the Home Investment Partnership Funds. And I'll get into, Marsh mentioned CHODOs, Community Housing Development Organizations, and why are they important, and what role do they have in the community, but more importantly, what role do they have with the Home Investment Partnership Program? Because they do have a role, and they actually have a lot of benefits that they can bring for a community, but they have to be set up appropriately in order to be certified. So, you know, our multifamily housing tools, we have federal housing tax credits, and I was just coming in here and I looked across the street, and I remember that was 9 North, I think 9 North's tax credits. We did that one. I remember working with the developer on that one. We actually are very fortunate in our state. We just got a state tax credit with our state legislators, and so we actually just made our first awards of the state tax credit last November. The new applications will be coming in July of this year, and I'll show you a map of where the awards went. It's $30 million. We can allocate $6 million for the next 5 years. So we made 10 awards in November, and like I said, I'll share those with you in just a second. We have multifamily bonds. That also, these are much larger developments. On a tax credit deal, that first bullet point, those are usually somewhere between, I would say, 42 units to about 68 units. And you can have any type of development that you can think of. And so I'm going to share some examples with you. State tax credits, multifamily bonds, those are much larger. They're usually over 100 units. They're probably somewhere between 120 to 160 units. The Home Investment Partnership Program is one of the programs I mentioned. And then we have the Indiana Housing Community Development Fund. This is a state resource that we have. It's not a lot of money. But what we do with it is normally we fill gaps on some of those other funding sources that we have. Usually there's a smaller gap of a $500,000 or something like that. So we'll use the development fund to help fill some of those gaps and provide flexible loans for them with flexible terms. And then there's the National Housing Trust Fund. And again, this is usually a gap financing for specifically targeting our lower income developments when they target for like permanent supportive housing, especially your most vulnerable population that needs wraparound services for them to be successful. We do have mortgage. IHCDA was actually created as a bank to do single-family mortgages. And we have products for mortgages. If you're a first-time home buyer or you know someone who's being a first-time home buyer, they just have to work with one of our lenders. We have over 100 lenders across our state in every county. And we provide up to 6% down payment assistance for those home buyers. Here's the chart that I mentioned. We did almost 1,400, almost 1,500 units with the state tax credit. We did 10 awards, and you can see the geographic distribution across our state. The applications, again, for this year will be coming in July. I want to give you some specific examples of how housing connects the dots, okay? This is downtown Petersburg. It's called Downtown Terrace. And it connected housing and healthcare, but it also connected community revitalization. Because on this site, there was a vacant building that was falling down. You can see, there's a picture down here on the bottom where you can see they had the cones up and the barrels, and because you couldn't walk by it because the building's ready to fall down. But there was a building that was also part historic, and you can see it on the very end there. I don't know if you can see it very well, but there is a historic building. And so they preserved it and then new construction around it. Pike County doesn't have a hospital. But, so what they did was, this is senior housing, and they put a medical clinic on the ground floor. And this is also 2 blocks from the courthouse square. It's on Main Street, so. Speaking of courthouse squares, we've had a lot of activity on our courthouse squares using affordable housing, using the tax credits across our state. I just highlighted 4. I could be up here for the next 30 minutes and I could highlight developments across our state in terms of what we've been able to bring to the courthouse squares and to preserve them. And to actually, so the one here on the upper left, that's Brookville. That's senior housing. On that ground floor, there's a pharmacy, there's a restaurant. But also what's interesting, if you can see behind it, you look behind it right there, that's new construction. So they wasn't able to get enough units in those buildings, so they had to make it work. Remember I said you have to do about 40 units or so to get that units, that economies of scale. They did new construction on the backside. And that's really a beautiful view because you can see the hill. There's a gorge that goes right behind it. Across the street is the courthouse. There's also the movie theater. All those things are right there on the courthouse square.
Did you say that's Brookville?
That's Brookville, yeah.
Just south of Liberty?
Yeah. The one on the upper right, that's Delphi. This is interesting on Delphi. Right next to the Delphi is Opera House. Their development also needed new construction as well. They needed more units to make it work. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough land on the courthouse square or adjacent to the courthouse to actually do the development. So they were able to acquire some land. I think it was an abandoned trailer park, completely removed everything and developed a green multifamily housing development, like a typical green garden style apartment that you would see. But it's like 6 blocks away. It's not even on the same address. It's not even adjacent. So I think that's something to remember. When we talk about tax credit development or CDA or development of housing, it doesn't have to always be on the same address. Not all the units have to be there. They could be in different locations to get that economies of scale for a community. The one on the bottom left, that's Greensburg. This was a couple of different properties on the courthouse square and then the downtown. And then the one that you see here on the right, that's Martinsville, right at the corner. It's very prominent. And I remember, and this was probably 10 years ago, there's actually 2 other historic buildings, the former county jail, and then there's another building as well that all 3 are historic. But they're not on the courthouse square, only one of them is. But I remember sitting in the mayor's office on this one, and she told me, she said, you know, we haven't had anyone put over $10 million or any investment into our downtown square for years. Like this is we're talking like $12 million here. That type of investment doesn't happen. And you know what, have any of you been through Martinsville recently? Have you seen their downtown? I mean, it's a beautiful downtown. It's a great place to visit. They've got restaurants and shops, and it's a great downtown and a great square. But this was the first time that they had that type of investment into that square, and it triggered all those things. And yes, it is affordable housing. And I know people don't like to use that word, but that's what it is. And so it's economic development. It can be, if you use it right, and you do things, and you have a community engagement piece. Here's another good example. This is new construction, Mount Vernon, but it connects a lot of different dots. I should also mention back to the courthouse where, I forgot to mention one dot that it connected to. Obviously it was community revitalization, there was preserving historic structures, but the other dot that it connected was transportation. We talked about commute patterns. Boy, how nice is it to be able to know that you can just walk to a restaurant, be able to walk to healthcare. All those things, that's all transportation, that's all linked together, that's all connected. This is also transportation. If you look, actually here in the top part, that's actually a trailhead. Right in front of the building, they got a trailhead right there. So it's mixed use. There's a restaurant on the ground floor. On the top, you can see there's a rooftop where folks can go and hang out and overlook the Ohio River. Clearly the Ohio River is right here, it's right on it. And they have an amphitheater and a new park that went in, and it's all right there. So again, this didn't connect just one dot, this connected multiple different dots for Mount Vernon's downtown. And really activating the space of the beautiful Ohio River, which hadn't been activated. The city's been there for a long time, over 100 years or so, and it was really never activated like this, where the people could really enjoy a natural resource, a major asset of that community. And they did it with affordable housing. This is really small. This is Southwood Villas, a not-for-profit, a Chodo. These look like single-family homes. They are, but they're not home ownership. It's rental for seniors, especially seniors who have a disability. I did look at your demographics here. You do have an aging population. A lot of that aging population has some type of physical mobility impairment or disability. And so your housing needs to adjust also to making sure that we have accessibility and no barriers for folks. And this is rental. This is in a very, very nice neighborhood right beside the high school. There was a cul-de-sac that was built in Tipton in this neighborhood, and in 2008, when the mortgage market crashed, this cul-de-sac was never able to be developed. And so the local Chodo came in and decided they got this, with the city's support, to do some rental housing. Now, community, some of the neighbors in that neighborhood, who are all homeowners, weren't too excited about rental coming in, all right? So they had to have a good conversation about, while you're a homeowner, are you okay with renters and senior housing? And so it was a tough conversation for them to have. I'm not saying this was easy, but it was only 6 buildings. It was only 6 units. But it was in a cul-de-sac that sat vacant for almost 15 years or so. These are 2 developments in Anderson. The Field House and the Sweet Valley Wigwam. Yep, this is right across the street from the Wigwam, the old Anderson High School. Wigwam's still there. You can see some of the parking lot right on that one side there, the old Wigwam. But this is on the former site right there. These are 2 developments, 2 separate different developments done by 2 separate developers. They serve 2 separate populations that are some of the most vulnerable populations in the city of Anderson. These are high service, they need supportive services. So the first building that you see in the forefront here, that's assisted living for seniors, for folks who can't live on their own but are not ready to move into a nursing home. And we know when we provide assisted living that we can provide it at a much cheaper way, in the same way we have with the other population as well. But that's assisted living right there. And then across the little retainage pond there, down here on this far right, or up there at the top, that's permanent supportive housing for the chronic homeless in Anderson that rely on emergency rooms for their health care. That is not sustainable. That's the most expensive way to deliver health care in our communities, is through the emergency rooms. If we provide the services and the health care in their home, it is much more economically feasible for us long term, and that's sustainable for us. But this is how they approached it there in Anderson, was to take on both of these developments. Again, permanent supportive housing is not an easy conversation to have for a community. It's not. But it is, if we really think about how we use our existing infrastructure, like we did here, we put it in a community where they're close to the downtown where they can be successful, we can have a positive community impact. We got to connect those dots. Healthcare, transportation, infrastructure, housing connects to all those different things. This is Angola and Michigan City. The one on the far left, that's Angola, and that's just a small business. These are entrepreneurs that they wanted to develop affordable housing for entrepreneurs, but also they wanted to link them to the Enterprise Center, which is their small business incubator system for financing, small business loans, things like that, and provide them with support for a business plan. So that's just really right across the parking lot, right there, for those small business folks who are starting their business, but they also need an affordable place to live in Angola. And then on Michigan City, this is loft housing for artists. And then actually on the bottom, there's an art exhibit where you can see the production of the artists who live at the Arts Lofts. And this is in the Arts District of downtown Michigan City. So if you've been to Michigan City, you know what I'm talking about. Their downtown has an Arts District. And this is right smack dab in the middle. And this was probably the first multi-million-dollar development in downtown Michigan City to support the art district as well. If you've been to Fort Wayne, downtown, you've seen a lot of change. Downtown in Fort Wayne now is really bustling. It's a great downtown. This was one of the first developments to go into the downtown. Historic building, had a lot of different uses over the years, hardware store. Today it's affordable housing. On the ground floor there's a restaurant, there's a spa. It's right in the center of Fort Wayne. So again, you can think about all the different dots that it connects as well, from economic development to revitalization to preserving a historic structure that's over 100 years old, for seniors to be, or for small businesses to have an affordable place to start a business, whether that be in a spa or a restaurant. There's a lot of different ways in which they've connected. They use their existing infrastructure, improved existing infrastructure in the downtown as part of this as well. So a lot of different ways in which you can strategically think about using housing as a way of that. Yes?
Is that near St. Francis, the college?
I don't know if it is or not. I don't know.
I thought I was near there recently, and I think I saw
Yeah,
that.
I don't know.
I might be confused.
Yeah.
It's on the landing.
Yeah.
That's on the landing,
And that's
and that's, I don't.
way far from that, okay.
So here's an interesting one. St. Mary's of the Woods. You ever been to West Terre Haute? You ever been to St. Mary's of the Woods? The Sisters? Well, it's a college. They had a vacant, this dorm hadn't been used for a while. It sat vacant for several years. They wanted to reuse it. They didn't want to demolish it. So they created senior housing. Talk about multi-generational. Kids walking with their book bags, going to class, right by senior housing on the campus. This is on the campus. This isn't off the campus. This is an existing, it was a dorm. Now it's senior affordable housing. It's kind of a interesting thing. If you ever go to campus, you would know that this was actually affordable senior housing. You would think it's a college dorm, which it was, but they didn't want to tear it down. It's a beautiful building. You want to see the inside that they have. But they wanted to create that community right there on the campus. So I think this is one of the best examples of really using your existing infrastructure, your assets that you have in a community on a college campus. So this might be one of my favorite ones. This is in Camelton, the old cotton mill. It's right on the Ohio River. And what is interesting about the cotton mill was probably 20 years ago, this was, I think, on Landmark's most endangered list. A lot of these buildings were, by the way. But this one was over 20 years ago. A not-for-profit, Lincoln Hills, decided that they thought they would preserve it and create affordable housing with it, which they did. They were successful at doing that 20 years ago. Today, the property is tired. It needs to be rehabbed again, specifically for the mechanicals and things like that. So we did just award tax credits last fall so that this building can continue to operate as affordable housing, but also having this beautiful building in downtown Camelton. The other thing, I always like to talk about this, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I love that Hoosier urban legends, folklore, Hoosier folklore. You know what the folklore is on this one? So it's on the Ohio River. Our friends over in Kentucky, obviously, during the Civil War, the Confederacy shot a cannonball and hit it. And there's a little indentation at the bottom there where you can kind of see, but I don't know if that's true or not. That's what they like to tell. The story they like to tell is hit with a cannonball. So I love that Hoosier folklore. This is a great example of that here. So these are some of the rounds that we have coming up this year for some of the programs that I had just really briefly touched on. So you'll see a lot of the programs applications are coming up in July. We do on the multifamily bonds, that's a rolling round, so there is no application deadline. We'll take them as long as we have resources available. And so we have that. Our rental new construction, that's usually in March, so we just had that. For the home funds, we talked about CHODOs. Home buyer, for a CHODO home buyer, that's an open round. You can submit an application at any time. It's not competitive. Currently, it's not competitive. You can submit an application to do a home buyer if you like. For most home buyers, we only see 1 or 2 developments. Today, actually, I came from a board meeting. We did a not-for-profit up in Goshen who's going to do 2 home ownership developments, new construction. So they're actually using modular housing for both of theirs. I was asked to talk about community housing development organizations, and I don't want to put you to sleep after that. Great seeing all those cool buildings and everything. I'm just going to touch on this. It's a lot of technical pieces to it. So, but I just want to touch on why a community housing development organization is important, and why here in Richmond specifically, this conversation and continuing to strive to maybe potentially support or identify an organization, existing 501c3 that could become a CHODO is really, really important. And here's why. They're basically, it is a 501c3, not-for-profit organization that's dedicated to housing. And it has to have some things in the bylaws that are very specific about housing, how it's committed to promoting affordable housing. It has to have a board makeup of certain pieces. Like you have to have some folks that represent the low-income neighborhood. You can have folks you can't have more folks. There's a certain limit of folks that represent the local unit of government. So, it has to really be truly representative of a community. And it could be a county-wide, it could be a city. It can have multiple counties. We have some CHODOs that serve multiple counties. And it's just a certification, that's all it is. So, and it just has to meet this criteria. But why is it important? Because IHCDA does have to set aside 15% of our home funds, which is about $18 million we get a year. We have to make sure that we allocate at least 15, which we far exceed that because we incentivize our CHODOs. We actually provide them with some additional preferences in our competitive applications, but we do have to dedicate at least 15% of our funds to our CHODOs. CHODOs can receive operating dollars, up to $50,000 a year if they undertake a CHODO project, whether that be home ownership or rental. And it doesn't mean that you have to do a certain number of units, it just means you have to do a project. And the project could be one home ownership property. If you want to do one single family home, that's enough. But that supports that CHODO operating dollars is what we provide to our CHODOs. Let me go back real quick. The other thing that we do is we provide pre-development loans. Housing development is obviously risky, specifically in the planning process. Getting site control, making sure there's no environmental issues or historic issues. So all those things are very, very risky, and IHCDA can provide pre-development loans to our CHODOs, and if anything goes wrong within that process that's outside of the control of the CHODO, then we can forgive that loan. So it reduces that risk for that CHODO to take on a housing project, because there is obviously a lot of risk up front. So this is a big benefit in my mind as to why you would want to have a CHODO. It's not just the operating, it's that pre-development access to that cheap capital that you can have. This presentation is for all of you, you can have it. These are hyperlinks, so if you want to look at the CHODO website and go into a little bit more detail, we have the hyperlinks here for you on that. If you're interested in anything that I had to say today, every Friday, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, I send out a Jake's Friday note. I do a site visit. I literally go to properties across our state. I step foot on them. I take pride in doing that. And I talk about those projects that you see across our state that's affordable housing, because I really try really hard to share with the public what really is affordable housing. It's not what a lot of folks think of it is, which I shared with you today. So if you like those pictures and things I did, I do that every Friday in my Friday note. And then we also share some other things that are going on within ICDA and then also with some of our housing partners across our state. So if you want to sign up for my Friday note, you certainly can do that. We have a magazine, we have our annual report, and other things like that. So with that, I'm going to leave the housing needs assessment with you, or you can pull it up. I recommend actually you pull it up on your own and do what I did, which is don't spend the whole days looking at it, but one of those first things that jump off the page at you that you think are important to have a conversation about here. So, all right, I'll stop there and answer any questions you might have. So.
So a lot of the housing here that you mentioned earlier, the vacant houses, are historic homes that have been sitting vacant. I'm finding one of the difficulties in getting those back into homeowners is lending. Nobody wants to lend against these buildings at all, either for purchase or renovation. And additionally, even if they were able to be purchased or get a loan for renovation, insuring these homes is a major problem. And rather than just tear these down and build new so that you can get that, what programs are available to try to get these where they are in use again, rather than just tear them down to something that's insurable?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And it's not just with preserving historic structures either. Anytime that you're developing, especially single-family homes in and I'm going to use the example of underserved, because I don't know what the neighborhood is, or I don't understand. I don't know what any of that is. I don't have all the facts. But I do know that specifically, oftentimes when we're trying to invest into underserved areas, meaning that, like I said, there hasn't been any major investment into a neighborhood, the property values don't support the appraisals, right? And that's whether that's new construction or preserving a historic structure. It is really hard to find an appraisal, a comparable other property that will support that house to go get a mortgage or to get a construction line of credit. You're absolutely right. I don't know what the solution is to that. Maybe there's some ways that you could do some guarantees, or maybe a community could create a guarantee for a lender to know that, look, when you provide this construction line of credit for $200,000, the appraised value is only going to run out at $120,000. But so there's an $80,000 gap. So if a community could say, we have a pot of money here that we've raised, and we'll provide the guarantee for that $80,000 gap for a period of time. Guarantees are really valuable for lending institutions, for financial institutions. They love guarantees, specifically if it's cash. Cash guarantees, cash is king. And so I know this because, I know this because, but we did something similar to this for first-time tax credit developers. We did a pilot program for developers that hadn't done a tax credit deal because they didn't have a balance sheet to provide the guarantee. And so ICDA stepped in and said, you know what, for 5 years we'll provide the guarantee for these first-time tax credit developers. It's been successful. So I do think maybe rather than trying to find a way to fill the actual construction gap, maybe you ought to think about what kind of juice can you add for the lenders to come in, or the financial institutions to come in. It's just a different perspective on how you might think about approaching that. Yeah.
Do you know anybody that's done that?
Any other questions? Okay. Well, I appreciate you inviting me to be here. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I thought somebody else had a question. Well, I thought your presentation was really interesting. I enjoyed it, but I'm wondering, do you know of incentives that would work with landlords to get them to maintain the buildings that they've purchased, not just split them up into apartments, get as much money as they can, and then let them, as Matt calls it, demolition by neglect? What incentives do you think we could, as a city, offer them to make them keep the houses the way they should look, the presentation of the I guess, the integrity of the architecture?
I wish I had an answer for that one. I don't know.
Well, one of my
don't.
friends here said she'd like to see something with teeth in it,
Yeah.
too. Anything?
You know,
I do know, and I don't know what the source of funds are. However, if there was a way to find the source of funds to help them with the maintenance of the property, then, because once you can provide some assistance, I know this I'm going to kind of go counterintuitive here, right? We want to help them, right? We want to provide them with the capital so that they can put a new roof on, or that they can preserve the windows, or to clean up whatever the issue is, right? Whatever the deferred maintenance issue is. If there was a source of funds that you could use, and it doesn't have to be a lot, to help them with addressing that deficiency of that building. Because once you can do that, then you can record a lien or restricted covenant on the property that enforces that that allows you to enforce building standards on that property, right? Because you are then a funder, and you can record that on the property. Right now, you can't record anything on the property because you haven't provided any type of assistance other than relying on the building codes, right? But what you can do is, if you could provide some funding, you could put some standards in there in that lien and restricted covenant. It's like, hey, if you accept this $10,000 or this $15,000, now you understand this is our expectations of not just repairing these properties, but you got to maintain this property. So there could be, and that's cheap providing cheap capital could be a way to do that. This is an idea off the top of my head that's just an option. I don't really have here's a federal program to address that issue. I wish I did, but I don't. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.